Questions for staff here in public? No? Okay.
No.
Would council like to have the applicant come up and make a presentation?
Yes.
Okay. Is there anyone from the development who would like to? Please, Mr. Pettig. Thanks for being here this evening.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor Linsky and council members for the opportunity to address all of you. I promise I'll go as quickly as I can to get through this. I'm sure everyone's tired after a full session and then an executive session. I'm Clark Pettit, one of the managing members of Granite Mountain Asset Management and the Vineyards at Cottonwood, and I'm joined by two other managing members, KJ Kassoon and Swayze McCrane in the corner. Also just wanted to say thanks to Steve and Doug, good timing. We've worked quite extensively with the city staff and the city attorney over the last few weeks to work through some operational challenges and some resulting contractual issues. That's resulted in the proposed amendment that is in your packets. If I may, I just want to make one comment, because from our perspective, when we just signed the DA and here we are talking about an amendment, we're not proposing to do anything different than we'd always proposed. Our attitude is you sign a contract and you make it work. What we've had is some kind of or different interpretations of some language, and so we've had some confusion over what we've all agreed to. And the purpose of this is to align it and clarify that language to what we've now agreed. We're not attempting to change anything. There are two things in particular that are addressed by this. One is we'd always intended to build models in parallel to finalizing the infrastructure, and we had agreement with Fire on how to do that. But when we got into the bowels of it, the water group said they had some issues with that approach, and so we've changed it to a new agreed approach. And we also discovered in the process that, quite frankly, the DA has some self-conflicting language where in one place it says build the models in parallel to finishing the infrastructure, and then one sentence later it says, but the infrastructure has to be complete before you can build the models. So we've just got kind of a bit of a thing that needs to be unentangled there. But we've got agreement on it. And the other is that we are proposing to handle assurances, which I'll walk through in a little bit more detail, in exactly how we've handled assurances on all the projects we've done for 35 years. And our reading of the language that says that the city can draw down the letter of credit amount on initial acceptance of infrastructure sounded quite familiar to us. That's the way it's always worked. When we went to do the first draw, we discovered that Steve and Gambage had a very different interpretation of what that language meant, and we suddenly had a phone call to say, okay, we have to get aligned. So long lead in, but it's important to us that we're not just back 2 weeks later saying, hey, we changed our mind on something. It's genuine confusion that's getting in the way of the forward progress of the project. And I appreciate everything that Steve has done to help us get us to here. So where we are now is there's two major parts in the proposal in front of you that we're all in agreement on. And then there's a last paragraph which talks about liens, which is a relatively new addition, came in late last week, and that's something that we've not been able to resolve. But we wanted to proceed with this conversation to see if we can't make sure we can answer any questions and hopefully get resolution today. So very quickly, where we are agreed, the first two parts, again, model homes will be constructed in parallel to wrapping up the infrastructure. We've already put the water in place, so we'll have complete water. And it'll be signed off by the city and approved, and we also have addresses being assigned so that if there are any fire issues, we've got compacted roads, we have addresses, and we have water. That's been agreed by everyone, and that's the first thing that this amendment would allow. And the second one is around financial assurances. I just want to walk through how this would work. As I said, there are kind of two different lenses on the language that's gone to this. What we've now agreed is a process. It's exactly how we've handled all of our development projects. It's how our bank, Foothills Banks, handles all of their development projects across 7 different states. It's how our lawyer has always handled it also. We recognize that the outside legal counsel, the Gambage law firm out of Phoenix, their opinion is that their interpretation is industry standard, And we have a little bit of experts at dawn, unfortunately, which I'll be honest catches all of us in the middle. So all I can tell you is we've never seen it before. And our lawyers never seen it before, and our bank's never seen it before, so nobody saw that as what the intended language was saying, because it's, to us, it is not industry standard. We realize you're being advised something different. I have called around to 5 different developers I know in 4 different states, and they have also said they've not seen it. So it may be in Gamage's experience standard, but it hasn't been for us, and that's the source of this confusion. What we've now agreed to is that Foothills loan has in place already an infrastructure loan for the infrastructure for phase 1. It's a total of $1.7 million. And that is both the sources of the financial assurances to the city, and it is the source of funds to pay the contractor. The assurance comes to the city in the form, and I'm sure you've been through all this, so I'm hoping I'm not repeating too much, but these things are complicated, so maybe it will be helpful. There, you have in your safe, I believe, an irrevocable letter of credit from the bank. And what that effectively says is we've set aside the $1.7 million secured by the developer. If the developer fails to implement the infrastructure, the city can come in and draw all of those funds to complete the infrastructure. The drawdown would happen that as the contractor completes the infrastructure in 5 phases around key milestones, the contractor would come in and submit a bill for that work. That work would be approved by the developer as being completed, approved by the lender and inspected as being completed, and then inspected by the city as being completed. And until everyone has signed off that said first portion of the infrastructure is complete, there is no drawdown. It's entirely in the city's hands ultimately to approve that. Once the city approves that and tells the bank that they can proceed, the bank pays the contractor directly. So the developer is not involved in this at all, other than to confirm the work that's been done. And in paying them, they hold back 10% of the amount of the work that's been done. So you always have a 10% contingency over and above. That means that at any point in time on the letter of credit and available the loan is sufficient funds to complete all of the infrastructure that hasn't already been completed and inspected, plus a 10% contingency. And that ultimately is $170,000 on the $1.7 million. So even when all of the infrastructure is completed, you still have $170,000 should something go wrong that's accessible to the city. And then upon final inspection and approval to operate, and only after that approval to operate is authorized by the city, then that would drop to 5% during the 2-year warranty period. So that would be about $85,000 that would be held as available. So if something did go wrong with infrastructure, there's additional funds to cover it, again, under the disaster scenario that we as developer refused or were unable to complete the project. So where we're at an impasse, and again, despite considerable efforts on all parties, is the last paragraph regarding liens. The underlying concern that the city attorney is trying to protect the city against, which we understand, is in the circumstance that all of the following things occur. So the first is that we as developer fail or are unwilling or unable to complete the infrastructure. The second is the city then uses that remaining loan on that $1.7 million, including the $170,000, to complete, but discovers that they're unable to complete the infrastructure, that it's just not enough money, even with the 10% contingency. Number 3, that the developer and the bank then refuse to put any additional funds into the project. And again, I just want to speak personally, that means we would have effectively said, despite the $5.5 million we've already put in the project, another $200,000 to add additional sewer is not going to be workable, and we walk away from our $5.5 million. So it's a very unlikely, it's a possible scenario, and I admit that some cities have had this kind of disaster happen during the downturn, but it's a fairly drastic move for us and for the bank. And then number 4, the city is then forced to top up beyond the $1.7 million, and therefore has its own funds at risk tied to the project. That's the scenario that we're trying to protect against. And so that's where the impasse is, because that resulted late last week in the addition of some new language that the city would be able to establish a first lien position on the property. And the bank has rejected that because at this point they've put 1.7 million in, so they don't find that to be workable. We've had several conversations through the weekend and all the way through this afternoon. And we discussed, creditor agreements and all sorts of things, none of which have been acceptable from the bank's perspective. If I can, to represent the bank will agree to a second lien position, but they won't agree to a position where if this kind of disaster scenario happened, they are unable to do what they would always do, which is first of all come to us. To be clear, I personally, Swayze and KJ and our wives have all personally guaranteed this loan. So the first thing they're going to come to do to get additional funds is come to me, my house, and go to take that. We've never had a failed project, and we will not have a failed project here. And the bank has said that in the case that they can't get anywhere with us as a developer, they will go seek another developer that's willing to step in, and they don't want to be tied up with the municipality when they're trying to resolve this through private parties that are going to be profit motive incentivized to move. And that the 1.7 already includes the contingency, and so they just don't see a way to make that work. So in summary, and our request is, we do feel we've taken this as far as we can through, try to contractually work our way through this. It's our perspective that what we're proposing for the assurances is a very long-standing approach and provides very strong assurances for the city. Again, we've personally guaranteed it. The infrastructure is well underway. It'll be finished in 45 to 60 days, so this disaster scenario has to occur really, really fast for it to even materialize, because we're going to be finished with the infrastructure in less than 2 months. And our contractor has submitted the first draw over 2 weeks ago, and we're unable to pay him. And so the risk that we're running is at some point the contractor stops working, and we have a real failed project in an attempt to offset a theoretical, potential very low risk failed project, which we fully understand is a good faith effort to protect the city, but it's actually putting the project into a risk right now, which we did not foresee. Our request is that we're happy with the amendment if the council is able to strike that last paragraph requesting the lien, or replace it with accepting a second lien position that's acceptable to the bank. And if we can make that one change, we're in agreement with all the other terms that are in there. But in addition, we'd like to agree that this approach for models and assurances that applies to all future phases. If we get this to work, then we'd like to apply that across the whole project and not be in a position where every single phase we have to get all the lawyers back and then renegotiate the DA each time. That's really the points I wanted to cover. Are there any questions for me or for us?
Does any council member have a question for Mr. Pettit? Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for your presentation. I'm sure you share the frustration. We're all, I think, frustrated to be at this point trying to hash out some of these details with the development agreement. I believe council was relatively comfortable with some of the amendments, but not all of the amendments. I would like staff to explain to you at a separate meeting what our concerns are. I think that there are solutions available. I think I can speak on behalf of the entire council that we're very excited about the project. We want to see things move forward. I was at the ribbon cutting. Councilmember Henry was at the ribbon cutting. I know the community is very excited about it. We certainly don't want to be perceived as being obstructionist to this project in any way. But I don't think we're prepared tonight to really hash out some of the details. I think we all agree on what the impasse is, but I don't think we're going to agree on what the solution is here tonight. I think there's just too many moving parts to it. So I would like to direct staff then to meet with you as soon as possible to get together. And it sounds like it's going to have to take all parties at the same table to hash this thing out, come up with a solution that works so that we can all move forward.
Well, we appreciate your time and your consideration for this, and we too are very excited about it. We've had a great reception from the community. I'll be honest, we've never had this kind of an issue ever before. It's not how we like to do business, and we're eager to continue moving dirt and building houses, which is what we're really here to do.
We are eager for that as well. We want to see the project move forward. I believe there's a solution.
Thank you.
I'm happy to be at that table, so I will wait for an invitation. Okay.
Okay. Terrific.
Thank you,
very
Mr.
much.
Pettit. Item 7 is discussion and direction to staff regarding the Civic Center renovation project, including possible funding solutions for funding the shortfall to complete the project as currently designed.
Mr. Mayor, Council, I guess that's me, at least to start. I think this is another project that the city and the council and staff are very excited about. There was a lot of collaboration and development of a scope of work that's going to be funded in large part, but not entirely, by 2 CDBG grants, both coming from NACOG with the city and the county as the recipients. And the scope, and this goes to capital projects of all sorts. Initial estimates are that. They are, and Clark, if, I apologize, this is sort of irregular, but I can reach out to you later,
Okay.
if I can.
Yeah,
Sure.
absolutely.
So there was an estimate for the scope of work that was determined to be the logical way to go about this renovation. And so a bid package was put together, and that invitation for bids was put out, and we got 4 bids. 3 of them were deemed responsive. In other words, the bidders fully followed the instructions and gave us bids that allowed us to do an apples-to-apples comparison. And they came back in a very tight range, in the low to mid $800,000 range. Unfortunately, that left close to a $200,000 gap from the money that was programmed and initially estimated for this scope of work to cost. So the idea at that point was to work with the low bidder to see if, and there's something within that bid called a schedule of values, which is another way to do a more detailed apples-to-apples comparison of the bids. So the way we approached it first was trying to reduce the scope to fit the budget and be able to award the project to the low bidder based on that scope that was changed to fit the amount of money that had been budgeted. That turned out to be not as easy as it sounded, and it required, it would require moving enough pieces of the work around that it's hard to say that whoever we select as the low bidder, it's now a level playing field and we're able to do a fair comparison of the bids that came in. That suggests that we need to go out and bid again. The other challenge, the other downside to doing that is it's clear, and Jeff was at a meeting with NACOG folks and the architect and the low bidder on site last week. It was clear that no matter how the project was reduced in scope, it would look like an unfinished project. And that's not to say that either of those things can't be absorbed and the city can't move forward in that way, though not tonight, because we've just teed this up for a discussion and direction from you. Because the other alternative that we've been discussing is, as long as this is the project that the council wants, and yes, it's going to wind up costing more than originally anticipated, there is a source of funds that we've identified, and there is a possibility to fund the entire scope. But it involves devoting more resources than we'd initially planned. But that resolves the issue of possibly having to rebid or having an unfinished project, or having to pay when we go back out to finish the project for another contractor to mobilize, which, you know, then we'd wind up paying for that same thing twice. So that's, I think that's the issue for council discussion. I'd invite Jeff to let me know if I've missed or misstated anything, or Charlie.
No, I don't think so.
Or Rudy. He might be able to speak to the source of funds.
As was mentioned, we received roughly $264,000 from APHP. Part of the merger between the APHP into what is now Kairos Healthcare. The board decided to distribute $2 million of the funds that they had, of their fund balance in a sense, before they actually did the merger. Once a merger would happen, those funds would no longer be available even for any of the groups. So we decided to go ahead and do that one-time distribution, and our portion was $264,000. Currently, it's not allocated to anything. It just came in, and we just went ahead and put it in an investment. So it is available for this particular project, and we've always allocated additional budget authority for these type of projects in case something comes up. So we do have the budget authority, and we do have the funds to go ahead and do this.
Is this, what's the contingency built into this? I mean, is there an opportunity for things to escalate cost-wise when they start demolition and restoration on the project? I mean, how much built-in cushion do we have? I'm obviously concerned that, you know, we're not going back and sort of striking line items to get things.
The contingency amount was $30,000 on this project, if I'm not mistaken, right?
It is.
It is.
And I think that's just built in because they do know it's an old building and they're anticipating uncovering something at some point. And I don't believe the architect felt that it would be anything too huge in his mind. He chose $30,000 as his comfort level.
Is this the same architect that really underestimated the scope of work?
It is.
Okay. So might there be some concern about the amount of contingency built into it?
There could be.
Okay.
I think you probably have a better handle knowing that the kind of work that you do, that once you start making changes or removing panels and such, you seem to come up with a few more things than you anticipated. But we still have $30,000 in contingency,
okay,
at least at the start.
Okay.
Was the price differential the only reason why that fourth bid was considered non-responsive?
We reached out to that bidder actually and asked. It's my feeling that they got in a tight spot. They submitted the bid in a pretty quick fashion, and they didn't follow all of the instructions of the bid. It clearly had said the bid values need to include the entire plan and spec book. We reached out to confirm that their bid value did, and they replied back no, that it didn't. And we could provide all this for, and it was a few $1,000s lower than the low bid. So at that point, we deemed them unresponsive. They didn't protest. We gave the opportunity.
Okay.
The two lowest bidders, I'm finding it hard to believe they bid on the same job. There's a big difference in some of the projects. For instance, wood floor, one of them was $44,000, the other one's $19,000. That's half the price.
I think you're exactly right. I think staff has some concerns with how the scope was. It was the bidder that was deemed non-responsive wasn't the only bidder that seemed to have some issues preparing and submitting their bids. Jeff and I were just talking earlier today about the audiovisual equipment and IT equipment item that by addendum was removed, so we were no longer asking bidders to bid it. But 2 of the 3 responsive bidders still did. So, you know, not looking to cast aspersions on anybody, but it doesn't look like when the scope of work for this was prepared, it was prepared with an eye to ever having to do any sort of apples to apples comparison or comparison of subdivisions of the work. And I think we'd probably be more careful when we looked at the proposed scope of work, schedule of values for another project like this.
And that was prepared by the architect. Okay. Okay.
That one right there is really a big difference, too.
Any other?
But I'm sorry, just to finish that thought, in terms of the 3 bids that we did deem responsive, they take different ways, but for this AVIT item, they take different paths, but they get to the same result because they bid the entire plans and specs as scoped.
So if we were to ask for this to be rebidded, what does that do to the timeline? I mean, I know we did this before with one of the other projects, and it was a couple of weeks, and it came back to us. I mean, it was fairly quick.
Yeah. I'm not sure that we can get this one done in a couple of weeks, because if we rebid, we're probably asking the architect to come up with a new, more detailed schedule of values and scope of work that fits the budget, and at that point, we're kind of at the mercy of the architect's timeline and schedule. So.
But is that a better recommendation as far as long-term? Because that might help us protect against some of that contingency issue and concern if we have a better scope of work.
I think it would be a more clear scope of work, but a reduced scope of work.
Well, and
I guess I'm envisioning when we go back to the architect.
How do you mean a reduced scope of work?
I mean, I feel like if, maybe I didn't understand, are we looking to award the previously budgeted value if we go out to rebid, or rebid the entire project?
I understand.
Because I think that for the entire project, as Steve had mentioned, they all got to the same place at the end. It's where it starts becoming kind of pieced out, we run into issues.
well, not the one that was. I mean, there was one that's under our budget. It got dropped.
Right.
So, I mean, to me, and I'm glad you pointed that out, there was somebody who could do it for the budget or under the budget. It just, they failed to meet all of the specifications of the bid.
No, not exactly. That bidder bid several $100,000 low, and that obviously stuck out like a sore thumb. And then they said, no, we didn't bid the entire scope of work. And then when we went back to them after the bids had been opened and they knew what their competitors had bid, they said, well, if we had bid apples to apples, we would have come in a few $1,000s under the low bidder. That's problematic. If we were to accept that, my recommendation would be rebid, because that gives that bidder an unfair advantage.
It's just like Councilmember Norman pointed out, it is very concerning when we look at the, the amounts for each current item here,
Right.
because they are all over the place, and we have some that are 50%.
There's about
some,
3 or 4 of them that it's a drastic difference.
And so
I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
In talking to the architect, and even the architect and the low bidder kind of had differences of opinion on, well, we organize the bid by trade, so we have somebody coming in here, although it's ceiling, we may be doing platforms for the HVAC and other things like that, whereas another person could look at it and interpret it, well, ceiling only and wood floors only, and so they all got to the same place by looking at the plans and specifications, which were really detailed, but they funneled them down into about 18 line items.
I understand what you're saying. There's overlap between the trades and who's responsible for what, so they would shove the cost over to the HVAC side when really it was ceiling replacement. So
Yeah.
they all arrived at the same figure because they have the full set of plans, so they can
Right.
see the entire scope of work. It's just how they shuffled the money from one line item to the next.
Right, so,
Okay.
the project in its entirety is apples to apples. When you start selecting pieces, it becomes a little less clear.
But I can't remember, to Ms. Norman's point and to everyone's point, I can't remember seeing such a variance within the subdivisions. So that's noteworthy.
But it probably has a lot more to do with the fact that it's a general contractor providing the estimate, not each individual trade. I don't think they broke it down quite the same. So.
Yeah, oftentimes, you're exactly right. A lot of times with a capital project, the general will go out and get sub-bids, and they'll fold those into their bid. And oftentimes, especially in a community this size, several generals will be using the same subcontractor's bid.
So I think the real issue that we're wrangling with, unless we do want to go out to rebid, but I think that would involve coming up with a new scope of work that's would create that apples to apples comparison in a different way, so that we can really compare all these 16 items here. I think the issue we're wrangling with is, do we want to use that money from the refund from the health APEHP, that refund, and go over budget by not an insignificant amount.
My concern is, I mean, a budget is a budget. We set a budget, and I mean, this isn't a couple $1,000s. This is a significant amount of money that, I mean, we don't know what other items are going to come up within the city, this fiscal year. Is this the item that we want to spend, an extra $200,000 on? I don't know.
Mayor, Council, I think to address that, there really wasn't a budget set for this. I mean, it was really based on available CDBG funds. And we've tried to stretch those funds as far as they can go. And, to complete this project, we can either invest $200,000 more or say, no, we'll get it somewhere else down the road. But somewhere else down the road, it will cost us more.
Mm-hmm.
And the other question in terms of rebidding this, I don't know if we're running the clock in terms of how soon we have to use these grant funds before we potentially lose them.
This project, we're working with NACOG closely. They're the go-to person to help us get through the process with the CDBG funds. They're already having to ask for an extension of time for what the schedule we're on now. And that hasn't actually been completed. In feedback, there's informally they expect to get that, but this would be more like 2 extensions of time into next year. We'd be talking about, going past the drop dead deadline in 2018.
Okay.
And that's why I don't know if it puts the whole project at risk to back out and bid if you had to, but it certainly will change things. And what the city manager said about how we started this discussion with the council in 2014 to do something about this building that's been such a centerpiece for the city for 70-some years. And we were going to work with just over 300,000. We're going to try to get as much as we could out of that, and know that it was just going to fix certain structural things and then have a kind of half-finished shell, and then kind of hold out for, if it took another 10 years, it would take another 10 years to make it. This vision that was being presented is to modernize the building in a way that the way people expect to go to meetings and conferences and workshops and have it right in Old Town. Be something that's the same kind of events that happen at the rec center now in the meeting rooms could accommodate even more than that here. Really little mini conferences and conventions, and they'd be right in the middle of Old Town. That's the vision. There is a big vision here to take this building, and maybe if you haven't been through the building lately, seen the inside, I think you really get the impact if you would go in tomorrow and see what it feels like and what it looks like and what we're up against.
I mean, you know, don't misunderstand that there's probably no bigger advocate for this building than me. I've been pushing hard for as long as I've served on council and to try to put some attention to this building. So it's ironic that now I'm at a point where I'm concerned about blowing an extra $265,000 on, or 64, but it is a concern of mine. I think it's frustrating that we have hired a really excellent architect, and the estimate was off by a lot, and that's difficult to wrangle with. But the scope of work has adjusted as we've moved through this project. I think you recall just shortly after I got elected, I was able to go to the County Board of Supervisors and beg for that money. So, hey, we had more money to throw at it, and that was a good thing. So we kept kind of expanding the scope as we worked through it. It certainly did start off as a much smaller project, but it has grown.
Yeah. Started out with just replacing the HVAC.
Yeah. Right. I was going to, just a couple small points, Mr. Mayor. I think just to remind the council, I think you've already directed and committed about $125,000 of city funds to the HVAC. In addition to the CDBG grant funds, and I think those are the pots of money currently planned to be spent on this. And then I think the difference, the number you cited is the amount of the APEHP refund.
Did I get that wrong?
And the difference is I think around $175,000.
174,102.
Okay, got it. Thank you for clearing that up.
If I can make a statement. I'm of two minds. I mean, I hate spending money that we just got. That's a windfall. And I know Rudy is on that, but in the same breath, it's extremely fortuitous that it's available for us to use on this project. Mm-hmm. So there is that. We do have it now. We've wanted that building to get put back the way it's supposed to be and have it to be a pearl down here. Mm-hmm. With the wood slats on the windows right now, it's anything but that.
Oh, it will be a tremendous asset to the community resource, which is really what its intended purpose was from day one when it opened in 1939. So, how does the rest of the council feel?
I think the shortfall is too big. I think it's a luxury item, and I don't know right now where we have a lot of needs that this, I mean, I thought it was great how you went and got the additional money from the county. Thank you for that, but it just seems like it's spiraling out of control, and I fast forward to your earlier comment, or go back to your earlier comment, we could be sitting here in 6 months and there's an additional item that was discovered, the $30,000 contingency is not enough. Mm-hmm. And then now we're having to use the rest of that APEP money or some other scenario. So mm-hmm. that's just my personal opinion. I think it's just too much.
Okay.
I agree. I'm of the same opinion. I think it's a lot of money, and there's a lot of things that the city needs.
Any other council members care to?
Is there any way to trim it down to what we've got to spend on it, and in some other way of possibly down the road finishing?
Because I don't want to lose the grant money either.
Right.
I don't want to just, that's significant there.
Can we sort of nitpick what's the most important and do that? We need that building. We need it renovated. I agree. It's going to be a pearl, and we need another meeting area. And it's just such a beautiful building. We don't want it to fall down around our ears either for lack of maintenance, like it has in the past. Mm-hmm. So, if there was some way we could take what we've got now and get done what we can get done with the money we've got right now, and then continue to look for other funding to finish somewhere.
I think what staff is saying is that would, when we have to go out rebid and possibly look at how the scope of work is itemized for the bidders, and then that could get us running a little foul of the timeline on this.
Well, how I think staff would implement that direction is we would go right back to NACOG and the architect. We would let them know what the council's preference is. we would get the architect. We're working on a reduced scope of work, understanding that we don't want an unfinished project. We want a project that can be done in installments, but logical installments. We also want, you know, the schedule of values to be created so that we do have a way to look at the bids when they come back on an apples-to-apples basis, and then it's rebidding that altered scope. Then, assuming I'm optimistic that they'd be able to do that, the one thing I'm uncertain about is the clock, and do we have enough time? We're going to have to, you know, rely on NACOG's response to that. Just let them know that the council doesn't feel like we have the extra money to put in, and we really don't have a way to pick a bidder based on that reality. You know, reduce the scope and then pick a bidder because we don't have a way to figure out who was the low bidder. And I think that's perilous and wrong, and I don't think the council would want to do that. So we'd come back to you. If we hear back that imperils the grants, we'll come back to you and let you know that.
For example, what's this roof deck? Is it a $40,000 balcony?
No.
Which line item is that here?
It's
The
number
R40
5.
roof deck? Is that insulation? I believe that's insulation. They did on the inside.
That's why I'm not in construction. Who needs roof decks, right?
Since this is the first reading, I mean, can we find out? I mean, this is just directional anyway, so can we find out what it would do to the timeline or to the NCOG money?
And that's why we came to you with this without action items teed up. We wanted to get a sense, and if that's, and I'm getting a general sense that that's what the council generally would like us to do, is go back and revisit the scope of work in light of the information now that the project as originally bid will cost more than we have.
Well, I think none of us want to lose the grant money or lose the project, so as long as we weren't making a motion on this tonight, so we can have more information for the August 1st meeting.
So basically, what the council is recommending is just have the architect work on coming up with a new scope of work, ask everyone to sharpen their pencils, and come back and rebid. But we need to know first if that's going to be.
No, we need the timing, I think, of if we can make that work with the grant money.
Right? Do you want to have a special meeting? Do you want us to just work through the city manager and update the council, you know, by reports, and just use our best judgment to proceed and have as much as we can have for you for the first August meeting?
I'm fine with a special meeting if we need to have one. I would hate to see us, you know, lose the $645,000 and completely lose everything.
Mm-hmm.
On the other side, I hate to see us spend, you know, $175,000 out of, you know, it's kind of one of those. There's still some questions that need to be answered. So if we need a special session to do that, I'm fine. I can be available.
It seems like there's another option here, and then that's sitting down with the architect and potentially the low bidder on the contract and figuring out what we can do for the money that's available, and then just bringing that back to the council as a
That would be good.
approval. I'm assuming we can do that.
I don't know if we can do that.
There might be, depending upon how that gets divided out, how do we identify the low bidder on this scope as the low bidder on the revised scope?
Okay.
And I'm going to be gone August 1st to the 9th.
Okay.
So it sounds like we need to rebid it.
And I think
To NACOG then.
Yeah,
But only
first,
if, right,
we
but
can.
only if we can get some assurance, I'm hearing, that we don't endanger the grant.
Exactly. Exactly. Yep. Okay. All right, moving on to item 8, special event liquor license application submitted by Christian Oliva Del Rio, applicant for Cottonwood Chamber of Commerce for chamber mixer scheduled for July 20th, 2017 at 849 Cove Parkway, Suites B and C, Chamber of Commerce office.
I have a conflict, so I'm going to
Okay,
stick to it.
thank you.
And City Attorney, I didn't get a chance to discuss with you prior, but do you think as a governing board member I should recuse from this vote? I don't have any kind of personal interest.
Right, you don't have a disqualifying conflict.
And same with Councilmember Norman? Okay, thank you.
Okay, I would move to recommend approval of the special event liquor license. Is there any discussion on this item? I wouldn't think so.
No, and I'll second your motion.
Okay.
It's direction only.
No.
Oh, I'm on the wrong spot. My apologies.
So Mayor made the motion, Councilmember Henry seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed?
Hi.
Okay. And the motion's approved. Thanks.
I move we.
Any opposed? Thanks.